So let's talk about the art of typecasting. Now, we've discussed typecasting in Drive Home reviews before. And for those who don't know, typecasting is a practice by casting directors and basic directors where they feel an actor has a talent for playing one thing, for doing one thing and doing it very, very well. And so that's what they always want them to do. This is especially true in the movies where marketability is such a factor. You know an actor is marketable doing one thing. You know that the audience is expecting them to do one thing. And so the idea of having them shift from that one thing is sometimes very difficult. Here's a great example. Did you know that Mel Brooks produced the David Lynch film The Elephant Man? But he refused to put his name on it. He refused to put produced by Mel Brooks on it. It's produced by Brooks Films, because he felt like if the audience saw that, even if it was just somewhere on the poster, that they would immediately think that the film was a comedy and therefore not take it seriously. Typecasting is not necessarily a bad thing. It has a lot of negative connotations, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, I hate, as a director, I can tell you, sometimes it's a time saver. Boris Karloff said that the greatest thing that could ever happen to an actor is to be typecast, because it meant that you had created a persona that was so popular and so recognizable that you had basically ingrained yourself into the public consciousness. It's probably why he did so many awful science fiction movies after the Frankenstein films. But to be fair, now coming from an acting side of it, I can tell you being typecast is incredibly frustrating, especially when you feel you have more to offer than just whatever it is, whatever role it is you've been assigned. This is especially true with a lot of comedians. What you'll find is a lot of comedians, once they've hit big and they've got a lot of, big money blockbusters under their belt, that's a lot of B's in one sentence, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to do the prestige picture. They're going to try very hard to do a film that now says, but I can also do this. Now they're looking for respect. They have money, but now they're looking for respect. And any comedian trying to go that route will tell you it is a hard thing to do. When we think of Robin Williams, we think of him, of course, as his, incredibly energy-driven comedy performances, but he was also, as we also know, a credible leading man for a dramatic piece. He did several dramatic pieces, things like Dead Poets Society, Good Morning Vietnam, even though he was kind of manic in that one, had more dramatic elements to it. Of course, his Academy Award-winning performance in Good Will Hunting. So he was able to kind of get that mainstream respect, but other comedians, it's not been so easy. Take Robin Williams' most obvious, what was then modern day comparison, Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey burst on the movie scenes with things like Ace Ventura and The Mask, and quickly became one of the most highly paid stars in Hollywood. But credibility, acting credibility, escaped him. Now, we know that he was able to hobble together a collection of performances that are really quite good. Everybody agrees that probably his greatest performance was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But he had others. The problem with a lot of his other films is that while his performance was good, there were always some issues with the films themselves. Man in the Moon, his performance is fantastic. It's just not a great picture. The Truman Show, even though it correctly predicted, reality TV culture, is a bit ponderous and takes a long time to get into, even though he is very good. And then there's today's film. I believe that this film, after Eternal Sunshine, I believe that this is Jim Carrey's best performance. And I also think it's probably his best all-around movie, but it's one of those films that audiences and a lot of critics just did not get behind when it came out. A couple of them spoke up for it, but a lot of them just really pushed it off, and that was 2001's The Majestic. It should not come as a surprise, given that it's on the show. I really love this movie. I think this is a great movie, and I think the reasons for its kind of status as a forgotten gem can be laid at the feet of a couple things. The public persona of Jim Carrey and the 90s. But let's talk about that as we go. So for those who have not heard of it, what is the story of The Majestic? Well, in this film, Jim Carrey plays a up-and-coming screenwriter in 1950s Hollywood. He's mostly been on B pictures, but he's currently working on what's now going to be his, his magnum opus, the thing that's going to make him arrive as a screenwriter. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the House Un-American Activities Commission comes gunning for him. He has been named as a communist, and he's being called upon to testify. And of course, when that happened in those days, the minute your name got mentioned, everything stopped. Your world was completely yanked out from under you. So in a day, he loses everything and now has the prospect of going up against, this incredibly scary group of old men. So he obviously distraught. He gets drunk, goes for a drive, has a terrible car accident, washes up on a beach, and completely loses his memory. He's taken to this small town where he is mistaken by the townspeople as one of the young men from the town who had left to fight in World War II and who was reported missing in action. So they all believe he is this ultra great guy called Luke. Of course, he is completely out of it, amnesia all the way. So he can't disprove it, but and it's one of those films where, through the magic of love and blah, 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 and the magic of the movies, the guy who thinks he's, his son, played by Martin Landau, owned the movie theater in town, and they're going to fix it up. And through the magic of love, movies, and blah, 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 he begins to see the greatness of life, and the town comes back alive. It's a Spitfire grill. This old town has come alive again, kind of thing, until his memory comes back, and everything, blah, 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 blah. I have a weird talent for making simplistic plots incredibly complicated. I can thank my parents for that one. Let's talk about this movie. Okay, first of all, again, I have to go on record and say I believe this to be Jim Carrey's second finest performance. Let's just say from now on, we know Eternal Sunshine is his best performance. So when I say this is his best, it always means after Eternal Sunshine. Let's just clear that up. But I think he is spectacular in this movie. He never pulls a face. He never does a weird voice. He never, flails his limbs about. He never does the rubber face thing. He is playing this 100% completely straight. And it's a brilliant performance. You see so much going on. He's using the skills that he developed as a comedic actor now in this much more dramatic role. A guy who not only has lost his memory and has the fear and the uncertainty of that, but a guy who is now being told that he is the greatest human being who ever lived. This guy that everybody mistakes him for is apparently, the second coming of Jesus, because everybody just loved the guy. So now he has the added pressure of having this legend to live up to that he doesn't feel is him. And that's a lot to play. And he does it incredibly well. And a lot of times it's little looks. Sometimes it's just when he chooses to go soft with his you know, with his dialogue. It's when he chooses to be more energetic with it. You can see him kind of gaining confidence as it goes on. He becomes a little bit more outspoken, never rude, but always. And then, of course, you have the added challenge of then when the memories come back, he now almost has two people living in his mind. He has two sets of memories almost, because he has the memories of everybody he used to be versus, you know, what everybody has shown him he could be. And again, that having that idol to live up to plays very heavy on him. It's a really, there's just so much going on. There's so much to play in this. And he does it just flawlessly. What's funny is that he had the look back in his younger days. He had the look of a classic Hollywood star. He really did. He had kind of a Jimmy Stewart look to him. So he fits really well into this world. It also helps that he's surrounded. This film has an amazing cast. Of course, Martin Landau, David Ogden Stiers, not Peter Brooks. I can't remember I forgot the guy's name, but you know, the guy from Shawshank Redemption, you know, who played Brooks. You know, Hal Holbrook, Bob Balaban, Laurie Holden. A special shout out you got to give to Laurie Holden, who plays, you know, I hate to use this terminology, but it is kind of terminology that a lot of the movies kind of had for Carrey. She's the girl. She's the love interest. But she has a lot to do and a lot of emotional heavy lifting to do in this as someone who's supposedly met with their one-time love of their life. And, you know, of course, they don't remember her, and there's that strain. There's also the strain of disbelief, so on and so on and so on. But she's another one who's really being put through the acting paces in this, and I think she does it incredibly well. She matches him, and I think that's something that really, if you've never been on stage, especially if you've never been on stage or on screen with a really charismatic personality, matching that person, even if they aren't going to their full extent. Again, Jim Carrey is not going to his full extent here, but he is still a very magnetic screen personality. So matching him and keeping your performance on par with someone like that is unbelievably difficult. It is exhausting work. And she matches him like perfectly. I think this is, I would almost say I think they have a little bit more on-screen chemistry than he and Kate Winslet did. I think there's real chemistry to it. Of course, you know, there's more going on in this film than just, you know, kind of the basic story. There's that very interesting story of America as it was perceived as it was. The big hook about this town that he washes up to is it gave, I think they say 60 some of their young men to World War II. So the America that those young men went and fought and died for, and the America that this town gave its, you know, fathers, brothers, sons, and husbands to, versus the America that it has become. One of paranoia, one of ugliness, you know, mistrust, scapegoating. You know, thank God we don't live in such a time. Thank God all of that is but, you know, the feeble dreams of the past. I remember the first time I saw this film, because back then these movies like this had a formula to them, and you knew at the end, especially if you're going up against, you know, the House On-American Activities Commission, you know that in the end your hero is going to have to give an impassioned speech, you know, the Oscar clip moment, kind of. So you're waiting for that climactic speech, and when it comes, I remember when I first saw the movie back in the day, finding it a little lackluster, because you were expecting one of these big, you know, we few, we happy few, you know, big, bombastic, you know, speeches about, and I will always love America, and I will fight for the da-da-da-da-da. And what we get is a little bit more disjointed. It's a little bit more, I don't know, it feels very hodgepodge and whatnot. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was kind of disappointed in the speech. But luckily, through multiple viewings and having a better understanding of character and story structure now than I did then, I find that this is one of the better of those speeches, because it does not feel pre-prepared. This guy didn't go into this incredibly scary and frightening situation and go, well, I'm just, you know, I've got courage and blah, blah, blah. It's a subtle build, again, going back to Carrey's acting in it. It's a subtle build. And it's something that you can see that this guy is coming up with on the spot. It's something that he is thinking of as it comes. And it's a moment where you see the influence of the town, of this person that he's been hailed as for so long, coming into him. It's interesting to note, again, the differences in the two characters, the one that he is and the one that he's mistaken for. The one that he is mistaken for is, of course, this, you know, holier than thou, perfectly wonderful, you know, walks on water and doesn't get his feet wet, you know, type of guy. Whereas the character he is not a bad guy, but he's more of a, you know, keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and try to ride something out, which I think, especially back then, that was not an unreasonable stance to take. You know, because he could have gotten out of all of this if he gotten up and just said, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again, here are some other names. And what we see during that speech is him kind of, you know, growing a conscience. Not that he didn't have one before, but that it's starting to come to the forefront. I talked about, you know, the two things that I think kind of sunk this movie at the time, and I think still kind of play a little against. Now, number one, like I said, is the public persona of Jim Carrey at the time. He was a comedic actor. This is the guy who was known for literally talking out of his ass. You know, in the big rubbery face, all righty, you know, that kind of shit. And he was having a hell of a time breaking out of that mold. And it'd be hard to do, because that was what made you a star. That's what got you, you know, like I say, he was the highest paid star in Hollywood at one time. But he was, and you can kind of, I don't know, but maybe it's just me, but I kind of see that frustration a little bit in this film. I see him being very frustrated, and at the right times. He's using his frustration correctly. This is a story of a guy who is being put in a box, multiple boxes, really, and being told, this is who you are. The committee's telling him you are communist. The town is telling him you're this, and him kind of saying, no, I'm me. You know, so I think those scenes of frustration in both instances, I think that's true. I think and it'd be hard not to be, because again, he's a good actor, very good actually. But the public just didn't want that from him. I think the other problem that sinks this film is, again, the 90s. The problem is not the right. I think the other element, because it's not a problem, is the 90s. Now, I hear you saying, but you just said the movie was from 2001. Yes, I did, but like I've said multiple times on these Forgotten Gems, you know, the first 2 years of a new decade are basically coming off the hangover from the previous one. And the 90s... the 90s that was our emo phase. The 90s had been, you know, had been defined by two basic stances. The, everything's great, everything's wonderful, everything is awesome, kind of thing. But also the inevitable backlash of the Nirvana movement. Reality bites, Clerks, that slacker mentality that we kind of got saddled with. So films like this one, which are at their core optimistic, bright, happy, feel-good movies, were looked at as something from the past. They were hokey. They were campy. They weren't reality. And I think that attitude about films back then, really hurt this film. I mean, the guy who directed this directed both The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, both of which could be called ultimately movies of hope. I don't know if you could say feel-good movies, but they are movies about hope. But they're also gritty as hell. They're rated R, there's executions, there's shower rape, there's all sorts of dark stuff in there that early audiences go, okay, that's gritty and ugly, and that's the real world. So it's okay if I feel a little good at the end. And even though this one had like the House of Un-American Activities Committee, back then, I hate to say that, back then, that concept was so foreign to us. The idea that would happen, just seemed like one of those funny little historical footnotes that, was awful, but that's never going to happen, and we can't relate to that, and here we are. And I think those were some of the elements that kind of pushed this movie down a bit, which is a shame, because this is a happy movie. This is a feel-good movie. It's a movie I am not ashamed to say I get a little misty-eyed during certain parts. I love everything about it that it's done to make this film feel bright and happy and hopeful. The costuming is phenomenal and has that great 50s look to it. The design of the town is so charming. The design of the Majestic, the movie theater itself, and especially right now as this is being recorded, and the whole reason I started this show, with not being able to go to the movies and remembering just, how great it felt to go to the movies, and what a communal experience it actually is, even though you hate the people sometimes that are in the theater with you. Especially for us, it's very reminiscent of Cinema Paradiso about, I said that very pompous, about how much the town movie theater becomes such a focal point, and how much it becomes a meeting place. And I like that subplot of just how much that movie theater meant to this community. And how much the movies mean. We're talking now, people are like, well, are they going to reopen some of the movie theaters when all this is over? And it's like, yeah, I like DVDs, and I know a lot of people like streaming, but I don't want to give up actual movie theaters. I'd hate that. That'd be horrible. Real quick, let's wrap this up. Is this movie perfect? No. There are a couple things I wonder about it. Number one, my main issue with it is this character of Luke that Jim Carrey is mistaken for. And my main problem with it is that he really does come off as, the second coming of Jesus. I understand that you don't want to speak ill of the dead. I understand that when someone dies, especially when someone dies in, any kind of public service, you want to remember them for the good. I get that. But I must agree with Jim Carrey. He has a moment in this where he kind of snaps when he finally remembers who he is. And they're like, well, Luke wouldn't do that. And he's like, yeah, tell me again how great and perfect Luke was. Because everybody in this town has kind of a rose-colored view of him. And that's very true. I would have liked it, and again, this isn't something you need a whole scene, or it turns out the guy was an asshole, the whole time, and he was just lying. But I would have liked it if, maybe in a retort speech or something, said, yeah, he wasn't perfect. He cheated on a math test once, or he never did this, he never did, I don't know, just something to say this guy was actually human and not Superman. The other thing I think about as I watch this movie, this is not a flaw in the movie, it's just a curiosity, something I wonder. I wonder how much it would have affected the film if they had edited it differently. Now, hear me out. For those who have seen this movie, picture this. The movie, instead of opening where it opens, the movie opens with him driving. And we see the car accident, we see everything exactly as it happens. But without the first chunk of the film, the first introductory parts of the film where we get to know Jim Carrey as a person, as the character that he is. That the movie begins with him waking up on this beach and being mistaken for this other guy, and we, the audience, don't know who he is. Now, you still are going to show all the background information, like when he gets his memory back, you could then put it all in flashback and say, this is how we got to this point, and we as an audience are going to go, oh. Here's why I asked that question, because one of the only things that bugs me about this film is that we as the audience already know from the beginning who this guy really is. So therefore, when he's mistaken for Luke, and when he starts to accept it, and he starts to, help the town, when he's, when he starts to do all this, and the town is coming alive again, as an audience member, you're always like, you know the other shoe is going to drop. And it's going to turn out that he's not this guy. So I just wonder if editing it differently, keeping the scenes, just putting them in different order, if that would make the film a little bit more interesting from an audience perspective. If we as the audience are going through the same doubts and same questions and same what ifs as all the characters are. Now, the two questions that come from that is, one, does that change the genre? Taking it from, I consider this a drama, a drama to a mystery. I don't know. And the other question is, does that cheapen his character arc if we don't get to see him from beginning to end? I'm willing to say, I would think not. It may alter how we process the character arc, but the character arc is still there. But it would have been nice if we as the audience weren't always kind of biting our nails for the other shoe to drop, but if we were kind of more invested in, is he this guy? Again, picky. The thing I take away from this is that this is a beautiful film. It is a feel-good movie. It's a feel-good movie about community, about ideals, about being your best self, things that I think we all, especially in this day and age, can maybe identify a little bit more with than maybe the audiences in the early 2000s who were still suffering from the 90s hangover. And watching this film really, I don't know, it always makes me feel very happy and very good and groovy and all that. So I'm always very, very pleased to revisit this little town and these wonderful characters. And I always like when we get to visit emotionally honest and truly dramatically talented Jim Carrey. I wish we could visit him a little bit more. So if you've never seen The Majestic, by all means, go check it out, especially if you are a movie fan. It is one of those movies that loves the movies, which I know some people think is a little self-congratulatory, but I always find a little charming. And it's a movie that, you know, feels good. And despite what the 90s would have you believe, and despite what a lot of people nowadays would have you believe, it's okay to feel good every now and then. I promise. It's okay to every now and then remember that there is beauty in the world. So maybe we need a little bit of reminding of that these days. So if you need that, maybe this movie can help you out. So, that's it for this one. Plenty more where this came from. The world is changing. The world is altering every day. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? But one thing is for sure, Drive Home Reviews is always here for you. So, with that in mind, as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.